another episode of Wiggy Reviews. We're gonna go ahead and continue in the world of vampires from our previous video, but this time we're going straight to the Queen of the Damned herself. That's right, we're gonna be reviewing Prince Lestat by Anne Rice. Alright, so I am going to preface this with saying that I have read most of Anne Rice's books. I have read Interview with a Vampire, The Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, Tale of the Body Thief, Memnoch the Devil, and a few of her other ones. So this review is coming purely from the point of view of someone who has read previous books, which I feel if you haven't read the previous books, you're going to be a little lost in this one, but it's not a requirement, I think. So that'll bring me right to my first point. The first two sections in the book are kind of reviews to help anyone who hasn't read her books in a while, or anyone who hasn't read her books at all, catch up in the mythology of her vampires. Because there is a story to how the vampires came to be in her books. So even if you aren't familiar with her books, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the vampire Lestat, even if it's just from the movie portrayal done by the most famous portrayal done by Sir Tom Cruise. I know that is the most well-known version to date of the vampire Lestat. It's not exactly who Lestat is in the books. Tom Cruise did a fantastic job bringing the character to life, but if you have read any of the other novels besides Interview with a Vampire, you do start to learn more of why Lestat is the way he is, and his past and all that. I'm not going to go into too much detail of that because it doesn't necessarily pertain to this book, but it's an interesting read, so if you're curious as to how Tom Cruise's Lestat stacks up to the novels of Lestat, I think it'd be an interesting study for yourself. So anyways, Prince Lestat. So the book takes place well after the events of her last book. This is the 11th book in the Vampire Chronicles, and it takes place in modern day in 2013-2014. And Lestat has kind of been off doing the other things in his other books, and he's taken a few years off and has just kind of been being a loner and the brat prince, as he is called. But then something starts happening. For a few years now, a voice has begun to speak to him and to some of the older vampires. And then it's starting to get worse and worse as the years go on. And eventually the voice starts encouraging some of the vampires to kill other vampires, setting fire to them and killing them. No one really knows where the voice is coming from, who the owner of the voice is. They just know that it's starting to endanger all of them. So, where does Lestat play in this? Well, some of the younger vampires, having remembered that Lestat has kind of become a celebrity in the vampire world, because in the book Queen of the Damned, he did become a rock star for a time, so he did kind of bring to light the vampire world into mortal world, though many people didn't believe it because they thought it was just a persona of a rock star, and blah 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 blah. So a lot of the younger vampires are asking, where is Lestat? Where are the older vampires? Why aren't they helping us? We're being killed and they're hiding. Where are they? So the older vampires do start to gather. Some of the ones that if you've read any of the other books, it's kind of like a nostalgic gathering of them, including Louis, Armand, Marius, Jesse, and a few others from the other books. And if you don't know those names, don't worry. They're important, but you don't really need to know who they are until you read the book, and there's plenty of background that comes into the book. So the conflict comes from that they don't know what to do about this voice. They don't know where it's coming from. And they also are starting to realize that some of the older vampires, back from when vampires were first born, are appearing and talking to the younger vampires. Now, at this point, I will get into a little bit of the backstory, not too much because it is kind of confusing if you aren't familiar with the stories. So basically, the vampires in Anne Rice's universe were born from an evil spirit back in ancient Egypt that possessed a queen, the pharaoh's wife, after she attacked and imprisoned two witches who befriended the spirit. And in revenge, the spirit killed the queen and then went into her body and created the first vampire. Now, that's just the basic. And then she went off and started creating vampires, trying to claim rule of the world and of the country. Really, the only things you need to know about that time are the two witches that she imprisoned. They were twin sisters. Makar and Maharet. I hope I get this correct. Makar, for punishment, had her tongue ripped out, and Maharet had her eyes plucked out, and then they were separated. Then the queen, who was now a vampire, started creating more and more vampires to create her army. Fast forward to Queen of the Damned. Lestat becomes a rock star. He starts singing about the history of vampires, and that wakes up the queen. She comes back from her thousands of years of sleep to regain her kingdom in a way, except she wants to rule the entire world now. The older vampires fight her. The twins come back. The queen is defeated. Maharet is reunited with her sister Makar. Makar kills the queen and takes in the sacred core, which is the spirit in form, and takes it into her body to allow the vampire species to live on. Yes, that's confusing, but it makes sense when you read it. So if you're still following me after that, now we get into the conflict of Prince Lestat. So after all of that has happened, Makar and Maharet have gone into hiding to protect the sacred core, to keep the vampires line alive, to keep all of them alive. So the younger vampires are scared that this voice is going to somehow reach the twin sisters and kill the sacred core, thus killing all of them. Lestat and the older vampires must come together, figure out a way to stop the voice, and figure out who it is, how to stop it, and how to continue living as vampires in a more organized way, I guess. They want to try to create a tribe, a family, more than just having them all over the place, killing at random and all this. So, there's the basic plot. Very basic. There's a lot more into it, and a little bit of history thrown in there for you. But once you get past that, let's just go straight into what I liked about it. Again, I have read most of her books. I've read a lot of them, and I've loved her characters since Interview with a Vampire. I mean, obviously I wasn't alive when it was first published, but since I discovered the book and read it, I have been full-on Team Lestat. I have loved the characters, I've loved the history, I've loved the mythology she's created for them. Queen of the Damned was particularly interesting because I loved how she created the creation of vampires, and that they weren't necessarily evil, sinful things. They were created out of protection and love for these two witches, in a sense. So their existence isn't purely sin-based, as, you know, modern times have pushed onto vampires. And it was great to see all these characters come back. Like, it was a very nostalgic romp through all the books, all tied into one. And there were a few characters that I couldn't even remember from the other books, but then when they were describing themselves, I was like, oh, yes, I do actually remember you. You were in that one tiny part in the book. And it's great to see that you're back. So it was very nostalgic, so I think it's a very good book for those who have read the other books, to see all these characters come back and be a little more, not defined, but see how they are, how they've grown, because, you know, we haven't seen them for a while, and now they're all living in today time, now, modern times. Again, the mythology, I just love her mythology. Hers is one of my all-time favorite mythologies of the vampire. I think she continued what past writers have done, what Bram Stoker has done, and what the classic vampire was originally defined as. Because originally vampires weren't necessarily, at least in my interpretations of what people didn't like about them, they were kind of representations of the sin of sex and lust. And it's always been interesting because in most vampire stories, especially Anne Rice's, they can't have sex. The closest thing they can get to having sex is draining the blood from a living creature. That's the closest they get to that feeling, the pleasurable feeling of sex, when they drink the blood of someone or when they share their blood to someone else. So they're a representation of the sin of lust in most people's eyes, but they aren't really... She doesn't write them as sinful creatures. Like, she just writes them as they understand love more than most people because they can't do the physical, they can only have the emotional. So their love is more pure, really, in a sense, than the physical love that we all feel being humans and alive. But now I'm digressing from the point. I love her mythology, I love her story, I think she's continued the intriguing and mysterious thing about vampires that draws us into them more than anything. And she really makes them more alive than some of her human characters, which is amazing and great. And she gives each of them their own unique voice. They're not all like just carbon cookie cutter copies of each other. They each have their own unique voice, they have their own unique stories, they have their own personalities, and they have their own issues that they deal with. Like from Interview with the Vampire, Louis had the issue of dealing with now he's dead and he views himself as a thing of sin because that's how he was raised and all that, and then he still feels sadness and sorrow for the life he lost, and then he feels sorrow for being this immortal thing that can't die, that is viewed as evil, and he can only see the evil in himself when really there is no evil in him. That's just an example. But there are, especially in this book, because she does tell the story from different viewpoints of different vampires and humans as well. There is a human point of view thrown in there too by Lestat's ward, Rose. But it wasn't, like, you know, some books when they do different point of views, sometimes you get confused as to who's talking, and you're like, oh my gosh, what I lost complete track of the story. Anne Rice is able to easily tie these stories together, even from different points of views. And when she does these different points of views, you understand who's talking, and it's not confusing, it doesn't take you out of the story, you're not kind of like, oh, I have to slog through this person just to get back to another interesting character. Like, she's able to easily weave these stories together, and the voices are so intriguing and so different and so their own that it's very refreshing to get to a new character, and also to learn who the character is, especially if you haven't read any of her other books, or if you've read the other books and you don't remember who the character is. It's such a cool thing to read through and realize who they are in the aspect of the other books in the series. And then it was also interesting for her to throw in the ancient ones, the ones who are thousands of years old, who were some of the first vampires created, and having them starting to wake up and explain things and learning more about the mythos and learning more about the actual story that happened. So Anne Rice is a brilliant storyteller, which is nothing new. Obviously, she's written many books, and I am just so glad that she finally came back to her vampire universe. So again, this is all coming from the perspective of someone who's read her books. I've said this a million times already, but I really need to emphasize it, because if you haven't read her books, I fear this wouldn't be good to just pick up. She does a good job reviewing the history, and I don't find it confusing because I already knew it, and I would be very interested to hear what someone who hasn't read any of the books, or who's only read Interview with a Vampire, read this book, and I would love to hear their opinions. So again, if you're looking for a review based on no previous background introduction to these characters, I'm not for you. But if you have read her books, I would highly, highly suggest this. Like, there's always that fear when they haven't been writing in the universe for a while that it's gonna be very stale and it's gonna not feel right because they haven't done it in a while. But this felt like it felt like she hadn't had a break at all. It felt like she just picked it up and they came out as fresh as when she wrote the other books. And that's something I really was worried about, and I was very relieved when I picked it up, and it just felt natural. It was like she easily went right back into the universe, which really shows that she cares about her characters and she loves her characters. And I love her characters because she loves her characters. And the ending was great. It was, I think, the only way it could have ended. And I say that in the perspective of it was the only way it could have ended in the sense of how they can continue. Now, if you don't understand what that means, I'm going to try to clarify it. There are some books that end and it's just kind of like cut and dry, that's it, ending. And you don't care what happens to them in the future of the book, even if there are no more books that come after. Then there are some books that end and you feel like, I don't see how they could continue going past the book. Like, it's the end of the story, and you're like, there's no way they could ever continue going that way. For this, it felt like everything was not necessarily summed up, but they organized themselves into a way that made sense and that could reliably and truthfully perpetuate their existence in our modern world. because you have to understand, the books started back in, I'm gonna get the date wrong, back in the 80s, you know, when technology wasn't, it was advanced, but it wasn't as advanced as it is now. And reading through all the books years apart, it was so intriguing to watch how the technology started affecting them in a way. Lestat says it in this book. He's like, every time I wake up, there's some new technology I have to learn. I can never figure out my phone. I always have to get a new one because I can't figure this stupid thing out. And he always talks about how the young vampires are, you know, filming him on their phones and all this. So I think the ending that was given was a good way to continue them in the modern world and continue them in a believable way in the modern world. I guess all I can say is it was the only way I feel like it could have ended, and it was a brilliant way that it ended, and it was like very not surprising. Surprising but not surprising. Like, it was kind of like a, oh good, that'll work. I'm glad that's how it happened. It wasn't upsetting like some books end. So with all that said, her writing style is still beautiful. I love her writing style. It's just because you can feel all the love she has for these stories. Like, she loves these characters, she loves these stories she's created, she loves this universe that she's built, and the mythology is just growing stronger and stronger every time she writes about it. So with all that said, I guess I'll just get to the score. And I have to preface the score with, this is my score as a person who has read the books, understands the mythology, and has been with these characters for years and years and years. Not as long as some people, I know there are people out there who actually read Interview with a Vampire when it first came out, but this is coming from someone who has read most of her books, loves her characters, and knows the mythology that went behind it. So with that in mind, my score is a 10 out of 10. If I had to try to score it based off of coming into it cold, with not knowing any of the stories, any of the mythology, any of the characters, I'm sure it would be a lower score. But truthfully, if you're reading the 11th book in a series, you're not gonna know what's going on. That's just how it is. Some authors can get away with that, but for this one, I feel you have to have at least read Interview with the Vampire and Queen of the Damned to actually fully understand what's going on. That is just my opinion. We all are free to share them, so I cannot give a score based, so if I had to give a score based on a cold read of this, I'm not sure what it would be. But for me, personally, as someone who has read the stories, I give it a 10 out of 10. Take that for what you will. Alright, I promise the next book won't be about vampires, because I know some of you are probably sick of vampires due to past iterations of them. So the next book, I will try to do something a little more, I don't know, thriller. We'll try a thriller book next time. So I hope you stay tuned for that, and I will see you next time on Wiggy Reviews. Bye! So overall, Anne Rice is a brilliant storyteller. And she's able to create these great characters and have their stories be very unique, and I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by these fuckers upstairs.